Just to introduce myself, I'm Jed Cowser, Architect Principal at BDP and also an FBE committee member. And we're a collection of built environment professionals. We organise events to share knowledge and stimulate debate, which is what today is all about. And I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the FBE. I'm absolutely delighted that you could join us today. I'd very much like this to be an interactive session, and I really welcome questions from all you guys through the chat system, and I'll pick those up as we go along. What we're talking about today is the future of built environment design, and hopefully now we can see the end of the pandemic restrictions as the world's beginning to reset itself, and we're getting back to our cities. And there's clearly a way to go with that, with the new strains evolving. However, if we put that to one side, I think there's potentially very exciting times for the built environment industry as we look to the future and confront the challenges that we face as design professionals. I think Rosie Bristow from The Guardian really put it very eloquently in a recent article. And she stated, resource scarcity, climate change, and an increasing population represent a trio of challenges facing the entire world. When increased urbanisation and burgeoning middle classes are added into the mix, thinking about the built environment can maintain more sustainable lifestyle is critical. I mean, some would say we're in the fourth industrial revolution. The acceleration of innovation and the velocity of disruption is incredible to see. And the physical world is getting more connected to the digital world with the emergence of the Internet of Things, big data. Increasingly as a practice, we're being asked to design digital twins. We use virtual reality much more. And there's an increase in smart design and smart buildings using data-driven solutions to improve the life, health and well-being of an increasing aging population. But there are constraints on the planet for us to achieve that and sustain the economy, which all means that we're going to have to design things differently. There's an absolute need to reduce carbon emissions and combat global warming, respond to the Paris Climate Change Summit. And even thinking about how we design sort of buildings now is changing, using modern methods of construction and design for manufacture sort of principles. We could debate all of those issues separately, but interestingly, I think they're all interconnected. And that's why today we brought together a panel of industry experts from across a wide range of disciplines and from both practice and academia, who could talk about those new approaches to building, responsive sustainability, carbon neutrality, and the digital kind of agenda, the digital revolution. But I think the other thing that we've recognised, that I've recognised, is that design disciplines aren't so sort of ring-fenced anymore. The boundaries of design responsibilities are changing. There's not one digital model anymore for a project. It belongs to everybody. Carbon neutrality isn't an issue that can be targeted by one profession. It's got to be sort of approached across the board. So just introducing the panel, Randy Deutsch he's actually sitting in Chicago at the minute at 6 a.m. in the morning. So particular sort of thanks to Randy for joining us at this early hour. He's a sort of a teacher and a practicing architect, written some really interesting books like Super Users, the redesign of design, data-driven design and construction, and really is going to contribute sort of incredibly to the debate. Helen has over 20 years experience in the built environment, and again, quite interestingly, she's trained both as an engineer and an architect. So maybe she is kind of more qualified to contribute to this than anybody on the panel, and advocate in the advance of new material applications and building engineering. And she's a design critic at both Manchester School of Architecture and John Moores University. Rob is an architect, academic, researcher, designer, urbanist, consultant, strategist. Not quite sure how he's still got time to eat, and a futurist at the Manchester School of Architecture. And again, he's written some really interesting kind of books with Alan Jones, the president of the RIBA, defining contemporary professionalism. Steve is BDP sustainability guru. He's a member of the BDP lab, which brings together innovation and research explored across the practice. He's led the environmental design of a number of key projects, including Nanjing Medical University. He's a registered BREEAM assessor, energy performance credit certificate assessor, eco-homes assessor, and a subsea low carbon consultant. And he was previously named as one of Building Magazine's top 50 rising sustainability stars. So hopefully you kind of agree that panel is sort of perfectly placed to contribute to this debate today. And first off, I'd like to introduce and invite Randy to share some slides and talk about what he thinks the future of the profession holds.
Thank you so much, Jed. So Maya Lin, years ago, had designed a wave field in the United States, actually a couple of them, one in Michigan, the state of Michigan, United States, and one in New York. And she did so as an architect, but also as an artist. And she leveraged her intuition to come up with this beautiful wave field, this idea of waves going across the landscape. Snøhetta, not that long ago, was invited to try to solve a problem. There's this Max 4 laboratory building that was built near a highway in Sweden. And they were asked essentially to come up with a way to stop the sound transmission from the highway that meant that the laboratory projects were having problems getting good results. So in other words, they want to stop the vibrations from the highway. And what Snøhetta did is they came up with a wave field instead of a wall. Instead of building a wall along the highway, they worked collaboratively within their office and with other professionals, leveraging digital tools, but also leveraging their creativity and intuition to come up with a wave field that not only looked beautiful, but at the same time served as an outdoor space, public space for people working at the laboratory and people nearby. Also a place to collect water in the meadowland. It served a number of purposes, including blocking the sound or bouncing back the sound from the highway. And that meant that the laboratory projects could work. Importantly, the tool that they used, without getting into specifics here, to come up with the design of the wave field is the same tool that leveraged the bulldozers, essentially to act as giant 3D printing machines to make the landscape itself. And so while it would be lovely to see the landscape for Snøhetta on the left to be just as green as the one on the right, I think there's an important lesson here in terms of both collaboration, but also the possibilities available to us as we have more intractable or wicked problems to adjust to. We are working collaboratively, and one of the great silver linings of the pandemic is the fact that, yes, I'm speaking to you from Chicago right now. We are working together, debating this, today, all of us here using a collaborative tool that wasn't available to us decades ago. And so the way teams were able to pick up and work a year ago because of these collaborative tools, but also the mindsets and the cultures within their organizations enabled them to work collaboratively. And the best ideas for projects can come from almost anywhere. And that has forced us all to learn how to behave and to work in a way that's much more open-minded. Now we do have, in addition to the rise of climate change, we have the rise of technology, the AI tools that soon will be entering our field, architecture, engineering, and construction. And all for good. But there's also a number of these tools that miss the mark in terms of taking certain basic things into consideration, common sense and gravity in some cases. I still like my buildings to touch the ground. So yeah, part of this talk today is about 3 C's, what's critical and creative and collaborative thinking that we all need to have together. But I want to say that in a way that may not even go far enough. We are creating cities that don't make a lot of sense. They make sense from maybe from an investment standpoint, but not from the standpoint of, is this really a city that we want to live in? Just because you can do something, should you do it? And some of these tools, generative tools, which is a form of AI and machine learning, will not result in things that are beautiful that we're proud of in our environment, but they may address the bottom line or their own logic that takes us millennia to get up to speed with. So I think in terms of the 3 C's, in addition to creative and collaborative, we also need common sense and compromise as we begin to work with these tools on these intractable problems. I'd like to close this real quick little provocation with this timeline. And when you look along this continuum, on the far left is a situation where these AI tools, these generative tools, create a situation where no one gets to design anything and they're designing nothing. On the far right is much more participatory design, collaborative design, where we aren't leveraging tools. It's where everyone designs and everyone gets to design everything. And this harkens back to design from the 1960s and 70s. And in the center is where somebody gets to design something, the far left you might call the algorithmic project, the far right, the humanistic project. I am a full-time academic, so you have to come up with these names for these things. But basically on the far left is generative design, far right is crowdsourced design. And perhaps what we come up with in the middle is something called augmented architects. Yes, the right is generative design. Participatory design is generative, is where people generate the design, whereas on the left, the algorithms generate the design. And in the middle, what we're left with, and this is where I'm seeing things heading, and we can debate this or discuss this, is this idea that we will need to collaborate, and that collaboration becomes a tool like any other tool, even AI tools. And that collaboration is leveraged in certain instances, in other instances it's not. But there are right times to collaborate, and there are times where it's best to go it alone or to leverage some of these higher level tools to come up with the results that we need. So I'm going to close with this slide, that only the architects that are doomed are the ones that don't adapt to these changes. Thank you.
Excellent. That was absolutely fascinating sort of introduction to the debate. I'm loving the 3 C's. I'm quite interested in the idea of becoming an augmented architect. That sounds pretty sexy. I'll have a bit of that, definitely. Helen, do you want to take the chair?
Yeah, thank you. Randy, thanks for that. There's some really interesting points there. It'd be really just useful to sort of pick up on, which is one of the key ones you made is just because we can, should we do it? Which is always a little bed of a bugbear for us. Just because you can do it, is it the right thing to do? And then also the idea of collaborative design, as Jed said at the outset, that the need for us to be more collaborative as a group, as a design team, in generating a solution or a response to a brief, and what that requires is that collaborative respect of that the individual's specialism and their contribution, and an acknowledgement of the value of that. I think that going forward, the idea of embracing technology, I think, is fantastic. What I would question is our ability, our collective ability, to actually implement those designs efficiently, i.e. construct them. And the idea that, coming back to just because we can, should we do it? But actually, a lot of what we're involved with here in this location is about commercial viability. I love the idea of the Snøhetta response, which was actually a very pragmatic response to a problem that was actually generated a thing of beauty as well. And also a very practical application of a technology, and a practical delivery of a product as well. I think we've got a long way to go in terms of supporting our clients and helping them define briefs so that they can actually deliver their projects efficiently, effectively. We can achieve the aspirations or desires and not really aspirations, they're actual factual realities of zero carbon delivery. And whilst we're slowly getting into that mindset, there is still a culture of disposal of goods, of products, and the aspiration for us to reduce waste by embracing MMC in terms of modern methods of construction, which inherently do that. But also the idea, also, I was just reading an article recently about the 3D printing and 3D printing of houses, particularly on a quite a small scale. You know, the opportunities that are available there to us. The digital revolution puts the ball in our court in terms of those opportunities, but it's how we then, as that collective, actually implement them, and we don't result in willful designs just because we can, should we, but actually practical designs, and actually thinking about that cradle to cradle approach. There's a lot of chat now about the ability or the ease with which we can recycle our buildings at the end of their life, and some great initiatives in Holland, whereby there's a collective actually will only build it if they can take all of their materials from other buildings and put them into their new building. You know, imagine that as a mantra. It would be quite constrained, or we'd feel quite constrained by it, but also quite liberated at the same time. It actually gets the grey matter going in a very different way to what we're used to. And I think from an intellectual challenge perspective, that's, in some ways, we need to be thinking in that way. How can we reuse what we've got? How can we actually design a building that can be deconstructed to be used elsewhere? The speed of innovation, I think I maybe mentioned this earlier, and our ability to keep up with it, I think, is probably one of the hurdles that we need to either jump over or get over, because technology is moving so quickly that our ability to keep up with it in the built environment is going to be a challenge. So it comes back to that pragmatism and practicality. I'm not going to go for 3 Ps here, but the pragmatism and practicality of a design and our ability to deliver that design, but also then thinking about its reuse. So I'm here to kind of to hopefully engage and have a discussion around that. But yeah, I think there's lots of connectivities between the panel here, and I'm really looking forward to that debate after this. So back to you, Jed.
I'm really interested in the 3 Cs and the 3 Ps. Now they all fit together. That sounds quite interesting. but the idea about recycling, I think, is going to be something that we're all going to have to kind of take quite seriously, about 2nd and 3rd generation kind of recycling, because I think that's the only way that we're going to kind of meet the carbon zero sort of agenda, given that, you know, our buildings you've got to make our buildings stand up, or maybe we've all got to make our buildings stand up together, and we need concrete and steel for that. And, you know, there's all kinds of issues we've got to get across in that regard.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for that. Fascinating contribution. Rob, I'm going to hand the virtual microphone across to you, I think.
Okay, cheers, Jed. Thank you. So I'm going to do this quite quickly so we can get to the debate. I was asked by Jed just to have a bit of a chat about the direction of travel, and I'll start with a caveat from Stuart Brand in How Buildings Learn, that all buildings are predictions and all predictions are wrong. So anything we say, it's likely going to be wrong, but there might be some nubs of truth in it. So in the next 1, 5, 10, 20 years, we'll be doing projects that do not exist yet, undertaking services that don't yet exist, working with clients that don't yet exist, using tools that don't yet exist, working in contexts that don't yet exist. So the question is, how do you prepare for that? And at the same time, we'll be doing a lot of stuff that already exists. So I think we need to look at and we've touched on it with a couple of the first speakers, on the context of the challenges that we face. And I see that as both wicked problems and those things also as opportunities. So as has been touched upon, there's obviously the existential threats, both to the profession and critically humanity. Further pandemics, climate change, biodiversity collapse, these are things that we have to deal with. And we need to prepare for things not just within election cycles, we need to be thinking a lot further along than that. The socio-technical and sustainability transitions that are needed within organisations to tackle these things need to be critically engaged with, but also the just and equitable transitions as well of those organisations. And the context that we sit within in terms of stagnated productivity in our sector, some of the last few years of things like McKinsey reports make very sobering reading of where we sit in property and construction. The difficulty in demonstrating our value to clients and wider society, particularly in architecture, but other professions within property and construction, is critical. Accelerated change and increased complexity of projects, we need to start to get a much better handle on that. The spatial digital, because we all have to be digital incumbents, and the outliers, the incomers, the digital spatial. There's no accident that a lot of my students in the past and now are going into places like Cisco. So the digital spatial is starting to move in, larger outliers, and also smaller businesses that are coming in from DFMA and other things, with very few people with property and construction backgrounds in them looking for that knowledge. And I think there's a telling thing in something that I wrote recently. I got Molly Claypool from UCL to write something, and she came back with a quote. I'm not too sure it was from, that in property and construction, we're one of the least digitally disrupted, other than hunting, which I think is quite a scary quote. So that disruptive innovation and the absorptive capacity of it, I think, is a critical thing in terms of the context that we sit within. And when I say absorptive capacity, that's the ability for firms to recognise innovation and value, absorb it and apply it. And I think that absorptive capacity is a critical thing that we need to start to get hold of in terms of organisations and professions. And for me, it isn't about the tech. It is about organisations, and it's about cultures within organisations, individuals, firms, and professions. And I think for me, just to provoke the debate, where things are going, I think there's a few things I just wanted to kind of bring up to kind of prompt that discourse. New vehicles for architectural production, the kind of hyper specialism of smaller practices and larger cross-trans interdisciplinary organisations, where I'm seeing increasingly a lot of my students going. The future of smaller practices, whether we're going to move to, and the law as a profession has started to do this quite considerably, umbrella firms for smaller practices to allow for scale and agility, increasing number of my students going into contractor side or infrastructure, not doing buildings, architectural thinking into kind of that horizontal, and also into manufacture. So, the question that's been posed to me recently is, by students, are we part of property and construction, or are we equally part of manufacturing, which is an interesting question. The other side is the boring revolution, which I think is quite interesting. Internal systems and processes for productivity, efficiency, and effectiveness, a proper handle on knowledge management and organizational learning. The expansion of the landscape of operations, so the broadening of services by the professions and architecture and others, opened up by data and other things, diversification laterally and vertically. And one of the things I put up to students is a barbell, and I talk about architecture operating in the narrow bit of the barbell. And over many years, fees and other things have been compressed, but there's two fat ends of that barbell. And I think there's certainly opportunity to move into that area. And Helen touched on it, pre-brief, management, the realms of management consultancy, informing the client much earlier on before the designers and others within property, within architecture and the allied professions get involved, and also staying with projects with the client, particularly with estates like universities, MOD, NHS and others, to learn from and to augment and to stay with that project and understand how things work with that project and that estate and develop it going on from there. And I think that's an important area to look at. In addition to that, new ways of demonstrating value and fee, I think is critically important. There was an interesting thing done from the Royal Academy of Engineering a few years ago, which a lot of people have seen, of construction compared as a ratio of 1 compared to OPEX at 5 and business function at around 200 of that. We're extricating our fee generally from that construction small pot, but we're bringing value to a much broader area. And I think we need to start engaging and understanding what is our value and how do we extricate fee from that. And then I just wanted to touch on emergent specialism. So I'm currently doing a piece of work with a guy called Philippos Philippides, who's just left Bride and Wood, ex-Fosters, looking at research and innovation happening in academia, between academia and industry, and in industry and its application. And areas that Randy touched upon, emergent things that are part of our landscape and we must engage with: generative design, artificial intelligence, design automation, simulations for urban transformation, in things like adaptable planning, understanding that different orders that you do things as a city result in different outcomes, gamification, platforms for stakeholder engagement and equity, de-risking through collaboration, digital augmentation, artificial reality and virtual reality, digital fabrication, robotics, new material practices, biomaterials, localized manufacturing, circular economy that's just been touched on. And what's quite interesting from that, and one of the insights I got, and Randy, this is an area of his interest, and he might want to kind of come in on this in the debate, is that it's not about using the tools, it's actually about becoming the tool maker. And it's also about engaging this in whatever level. So you might be, and Luke over at KPF brought this up to the students in a thing I did with him the other day, you know, skimmers, swimmers and divers. We might be deep diving in these things, we might be swimming on the surface of these things, or we might be skimming, but we can't run away from it. It's part of our context, and we have to engage in these things. And finally, I just wanted to very quickly touch on kind of, you know, I'm an academic, so, you know, my focus is knowledge. Flora Samuel did a thing for me, and she quoted Leon von Schaik. Architecture is professionalized around the wrong body of knowledge. And I think we need to adapt. And I think we need to be able to adapt. As a profession, we're only around about a couple of 100 years old. We shouldn't be restricted by nostalgia. Nostalgia is actually a 17th century medical term. It was an illness coined for soldiers feeling homesick. It should be something to cling to. We need to embrace change. And very quickly, because I'm just conscious on the time, we need to develop new and robust theoretical frameworks and methods to be able to create validated and robust evidence bases to demonstrate our value in our services and to create informed decision making. We need to be more transdisciplinary. We need to blur the boundaries of domain knowledge. We need to understand that value is in a liminal space between silos, and it's not a thing, it's a flow of knowledge to allow for insights moving between those silos, and moving to and from neighboring disciplines and specialisms like robotics, data science, but critically remembering that you can't have transdisciplinary thinking or transdisciplinarity without actually having disciplines, as disciplines and professions are still critically important, but they need to evolve and they need to co-evolve together. We need to be more diverse, disciplinary diverse, but also geographically, gender, ethnically. There's so much lost and not created or shared, and I think we need to start discovering or rediscovering and pulling out that value that's there. The need for collaboration on knowledge creation, so collaboration between firms and industry, but also with universities on applied research and bleeding edge disruption, and identifying use cases, critically anticipating the questions that we need to ask as professions and society and planting them in education and asking the question early, and better leveraging as a sector, particularly within my profession, architecture, around UKRI funding, the 2.4%, which the government's talking about, reinvesting of GDP back into innovation and research, and engaging with industry PhDs and mechanisms like KTPs. And new models for knowledge sharing. I think there's something here. So for resilience of professions and sectors, laggards, people who haven't engaged with these things, that might be looking up at people that are engaged in these things, that are at the top of the mountain, hacked forward and done a massive amount of investment, they're also looking back saying, have I gone in the right direction? So there's a critical thing here for people to engage in terms of knowledge sharing and knowledge exchange, in parallel to firms themselves future resilience of engaging in NDA, behind closed doors research and work to actually get the market edge. So there's a balance between those two things. And I think critically for me, it's how we train for this. The apprenticeship model, which Jed touched on in his intro and the information for this event, but I think we need to be very careful of just creating this thing, this misnomer of an oven-ready student. We need those that are coming out from education to come out with the mindset, skill sets and tool sets to be the generalist specialists, the skimmers, swimmers and divers to disrupt industry. And it's critical to have multiple models for teaching and training. It's critical to have training that allows for product designer, architects, architect engineers, architect data scientists and others, and this connection between industry and university to bring real world thinking in, but also to take it out. And I think critically for me as well is how we start to train inside organizations and firms themselves, and how those firms can engage in short courses and specialisms as they emerge. So that connection between academia and practice and professions, that tripartite, I think is critically important. So that's my bit of a brain dump. So I hope that was what you're after, Jeff.
That's fine. I think there's a book right there, isn't there? Or maybe you're already writing it. Yeah. But it's all really rich stuff, and I think it talks about this kind of thing I postulated at the beginning, that it's all about blurring the boundaries of design generally across all of the industry, which I think is quite an interesting prospect, and I think it's what we have to do to deal with all the challenges that we face. And we've got 3 C's, 3 P's, and now we've got an SSD, which is quite an interesting kind of idea. Skimmers, swimmers, and divers. I'll use that one in the future. That's excellent. Again, virtual mic across to Steve.
I was just going to say, to keep in the tradition of the 3s, maybe at this point, if it was a design team meeting, at least 3 people would leave because it's the building services section. So go for it here. All right, as the only person from the pandemic who perhaps can't use Zoom very well, let me give this a shot. Right, cool. Is that sharing, Jed?
Not yet.
Okay. I'll give it another minute to come up, and if it doesn't share, then I'll just speak. So one more shot.
There you go. Success.
Marvelous. Right, cool. Okay, so I'll start with a little ode to building services, the first one ever, and then I'll carry on through from there, but it'll be fairly brief. So starting with the opportunity and the optimism. And within this, I genuinely think there's a real opportunity for the building services profession to lead on the collaboration in responding to some of these interrelated trends in construction and place. So historically, our profession has been central to the analysis and design of low footprint buildings. It's the norm for us to design building services systems and components for offsite manufacture and assembly, and critically disassembly as well. We understand the evolving and decarbonising energy infrastructure, and including how our buildings and places need to be smart in supporting future energy networks. And beyond this, and perhaps more in its infancy, we're increasing our understanding of the technology platforms which our buildings and places need to integrate in order to successfully interact with the users and their devices. I think another thing for us as engineers, we don't see process as a barrier to creativity. I think kind of process was touched on earlier and how important it is. And if we can automate, we will. If we can standardize, we will. And we know that effectively, if we can do these things, it liberates our time to collaborate, to be more creative and to be more innovative. And the ability to understand, manipulate and maintain the integrity of data is going to be central to what we do, and increasingly how we offer value and relevance to our clients. So perhaps now the more stereotypical miserable building services engineer bit on the maturity though of some of that technology and collaboration tools. I think for all the progress and future gazing, personally, I think the development and widespread adaptation of truly collaborative design technology tools is still in its relative infancy. Practices are off developing their own automations and hacks, workflows are a little fragmented, content can be variable, interoperability is so-so, and the interface between professions, contractors and manufacturer still a bit too clunky. And whilst I'm sure it will get there, I still think the if only Apple did BIM conversation is still as valid now as it was 5 years ago. And we need a real kind of product system-based approach to smart buildings and find ways around some of the kind of antiquated procurement routes to make sure that we can lock in technology partners far earlier in the process. And then quickly, I think a real key thing for our profession and our sector is the team, and something I think we've too long neglected. And we have a real challenge in our industry if we're going to tackle the opportunities and challenges available to us. And that's that we seriously need to address the skill shortage and diversity issues in the profession. We need to work with academia in developing practice-based learning and learning which embraces future trends and diverse skills. And at the same time, we need to participate in collaborative interdisciplinary outreach to promote building services and the wider construction industry to people of all backgrounds. And interestingly, I think building on the earlier points, we need to make it as attractive as some of the other career routes available to people. And then finally, I suppose with all of this, and I think, you know, as engineers, we can perhaps get carried away sometimes with the opportunity to automate, the opportunity to standardize, the opportunity to regularize. I think one thing that we still want to do, accepting that we will all be more collaborative and increasingly so in the future, is that given the trends in data, digital, net zero, carbon, modern methods of construction, you know, we want to remember at the end of the day that we're all human. And I think there is a role for us to support our architectural colleagues in pushing to deliver really inspirational spaces and places. And hopefully, Jed, that was reasonably swift and
that was perfect. It's really good.
So let me just try and unhide.
And you know, just touching on the issue of collaborations, a question that's coming from Stuart Grant. I don't know if you want to take it first, Steve. Saying the pandemic has exposed the maturity and effectiveness of organisational culture. What for you is the key takeaway in terms of how businesses, teams have learned to collaborate more in the last 14 months?
I mean, I think probably strangely, I mean, taking aside the point about the maturity and things not being there, I suppose oddly enough, I think we probably adapted very quickly and very well, you know, to the pandemic. Technology was put in place culturally. I think in some ways, you know, we talked about the productivity issues earlier in the UK and the fact that we haven't become more productive for a very long time. And I think, you know, we used to go up and down on trains for half an hour because we thought we had to, you know, and you might travel down for a 4-hour meeting. So I think, strangely, the pandemic, I think, has improved things in a way because we are more efficient, more productive, using technology better. But I still think there is a long way to go. And I think that the biggest gaps are always in the interfaces. You know, we're all probably very good at what we do individually, but I still think we struggle and things fall down. Various reasons, skills, technology, commercial arrangements, responsibilities, liabilities. I think we just fall down on those interfaces, and maybe things like NEC4 collaborative contracts are the ways where we might start to address some of that.
Thanks for that. And I guess Randy dialing in at 6 a.m. from Chicago is a case in point. I don't know whether you think that we've learned anything particularly from how the world has kind of operated over the past sort of 12 months.
Oh, absolutely. I think one of the things, you know, building on what Steve was just saying, which was fantastic, is this idea of empathy with these social uprisings and social justice events that have occurred over the last year and a half. I think and just the situations that we're in, working from home, working remotely, learning remotely, we've learned to recognize that not everyone's in the exact same situation we're in. The fact that I'm at 6 a.m. and you're in the afternoon. We've built up empathy, and we understand before we open our mouths that those that we are collaborating with may be in a radically different situation in terms of having lots of kids running around just outside their Zoom screen, and so on. And so I think that has helped us to become better collaborators, because we have learned to think like others, which is something that architects have always had to do. Think like structural engineers, think like contractors, think like the owner. but also to put ourselves in their shoes situation more before we move forward with any proposals or ideas.
Okay, that's really interesting, really interesting. And for another question in from Martin, just changing the topic slightly. And I guess this one will be a good one for Helen to kind of jump in on. Regarding recycling buildings, does the panel think that the rise of modular construction will facilitate this, or could it be a barrier? That's quite an interesting kind of proposition.
I think it is, yeah. The benefits of MMC are that the recording of the various components is a given, because every piece has been manufactured off-site and come together like a Meccano set. The building has been formed here and it's built here, and so from a recyclability perspective, the component parts that make up that entity are known. So in that regard, it makes it easier. The smart thing though then is, how do we take those component parts, or initially design those component parts such that they could have a future life?
Yeah,
that's a kind of a big ask, and I don't know if it's yourself who sort of said earlier, or someone said earlier, about it's not the second generation but a third generation. It's like, oh my God, I've got to think not only about the building I'm designing now, but about what it's going to be in its next life, and then indeed what it might be then after that. So that's a big ask. That's a big ask for the architects, a big ask for the engineer. It's a big ask for everybody. Yeah. And but I do think MMC does allow that recording, and therefore the ability to recycle to be done much more in a much more structured way. But whether it actually allows you to design buildings that therefore have a future life is a, well, we could debate that ad infinitum, couldn't we?
Yeah, but I guess it is all about sort of assembling, disassembly, and then the next kind of stage.
Yes,
which I think is quite, and I guess the industry has got some maturity to gain before it is kind of affordable and more wide stream. But I think it's a reality, isn't it? It's kind of here.
Yes, it is. It is here. It is here. It is a reality, and it's to what degree we can adequately embrace it without killing off creativity.
Yeah.
And uniqueness as well in the product. Everybody, client and design team, specifically architect, they want to put their stamp and mark on the world, but it's doing that within the constraints of that form of construction. But isn't that smarter design though?
Yeah.
Isn't that a more creative way of designing to work within those constraints? I'll just throw in there, there was an architectural couple that lived in LA, and they would only ever work with the panel sizes that you could get plywood with, plasterboard. They would only ever work within those confines. And that for me is smart design. There's no waste, zero waste. That's the way that we should be thinking, is about zero waste, zero reduction. Because you've maybe heard me say this before, in construction, the industry within the UK is a £10 billion per annum business, and that covers all from transportation through to buildings, and 20% of that is waste, and that's through over design and site waste. So that's food for thought, isn't it?
Yeah. And another constraint, but that's a really interesting kind of prospect though.
Yeah.
So Martin Ellaby's made a good point, a good question, and it kind of relates to Randy's sort of diagram about kind of no design to everybody's design. How do we ensure advancements in design technology don't stifle creativity of the built environment? It'd be good to get sort of Rob and Randy's view from a kind of an academic viewpoint about how students are approaching that sort of challenge.
Going to just repeat the question again, Jed, for a
It's
second.
about how do we ensure advancements in design technology don't stifle creativity of the built environment?
So,
using kind of housing as one example. So, you know, enhances the speed and quality of the build, but sometimes results in homogeneous house types.
I think for me, and Randy might want to come in here as well on this, it's about not being restricted by the tool. So, you know, a few years ago, you could see, you know, that building was done on Autodesk, whatever, or that building was done by a year out student with somebody who couldn't use a computer a few years ago using SketchUp, right? And it's an extrusion, you know, you'd see that. And I think it's about emancipating ourselves from tools designed by others for us to something where we're actually designing the tool. So one of the things that we do within the lab and the vertical studio we have, and we just opened a 3rd year studio in the masters, is the students design their own tools. So they design their own tools to find the problem. They design their own tools to find opportunities on real world projects. So, you know, all our students work on Northern Gateway in our 6th year, or with Manchester City Council, or they're working with the Estates Department of the university, or with Bride and Wood on the FMA in 5th year, and with the university in 3rd year. So they're designing tools to find the problems and the use cases, and then they're designing tools to help them design what, you know, for that opportunity or that problem. And I think that's that emancipation from this kind of shrink wrap thing to something which is about methodologies and being able to design your own tools. And I think that's a good segue to Randy and some of the stuff that he touches on in super users.
Yeah, just to build on what Rob is saying, thank you, Rob, is this idea that there's 2 types of creativity, right? There's the creativity of the design professional, right? To engage the future generations that we're teaching at the university to make sure that they don't think that they are just going to be answering to the robots, but also the importance of creativity in that's been alluded to already in terms of those who will engage with the implemented or built product or building that's out in the world. And both are incredibly important. The tools do not take away from that. If anything, these generative tools and AI tools that are being developed address the boring stuff, the stuff that we need to check all these boxes. We need to address building codes. We need to make sure that the building stands up. Not to take anything away from that. What it does is it allows the design professional to leverage their core competency. And more important than that is, the reason they went into the field to begin with. But even more important than that, what these tools do when they address the boring stuff is it frees the design professional and the contractor to address the things that are important to the public, to those who will be engaging with the buildings. And it frees them up to think about all the consequences down the line, including the ones that Helen was alluding to in terms of future generations and future use of the building that a lot of times we can't think about. So I actually think the tools will not limit creativity, will actually enhance it.
Because it actually gives you the opportunity to sort of concentrate on the things where we can be creative. I think that's a really good point.
I think there's a critical thing here as well. What it does is it opens up the context. So as an architect, as architects, in my profession and other built environment professions as well, we're interested in the context. So, prevailing wind, precipitation, etc., snow loads, all the rest of it. But if you've got tools that you're able to see, invisible infrastructures, what's the impact of that building? Is it going to, what is it going to do? How is it going to hit other in terms of the built environment in the city? How is it going to impact? These are things that I think, they reveal latent and hidden context. And as designers and people engaging with the built environment, we need to know that stuff. So it's critically important as designers that we understand what the impacts of our interventions are, and having the ability to have those tools to reveal that stuff, to understand things like, I've mentioned before, adaptive planning, doing stuff in certain orders that will give a different result, and understanding at different scales, from the intervention to the neighborhood to the wider city, and what that impact will be over time. That's critically important, because that's context, and that's fundamentally what we're interested in and what the impact of that stuff is. So for me, it opens up the stuff we traditionally are interested in, but at a much deeper, wider level, and also over time. And I think that's a very important thing.
Did you want to come in, Helen?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that's said there. And one of the things that we, as a practice, is kind of, we use the tools to, as Randy said, to assist us with that 80% of the project that we kind of know what it looks like, and invest our time and energy in that 20%, which is like the jewel that actually makes and creates. And you know, but the important thing is, and I like the idea of becoming the tool makers, is particularly in the training of our younger team members, is that they still need to understand how that tool works. So if they are the tool maker, then that's half the battle. Understanding how the tool works, and how the tool can work for you is so important, to then liberate you to do that creative thinking, and actually that collaborative thinking that actually makes your product sing. I think that's critical. Yeah, we need to embrace it totally.
Yeah. And just bringing Steve in on that from a sort of an engineering sort of viewpoint. Obviously, you've got some pretty good sort of building physicists and BIM kind of guys. But what do you think is the key to sort of the future of the M&E sort of profession, to get this MMC sort of agenda working to achieve zero carbon?
I mean, I think in terms of the technologies, the BIM people, the building physicists, and the analysis and all those sorts of things, I think effectively as a silo, you know, we're pretty good at it. I think we know how to design so that you can modularize everything. We know how to, you know, we know the principles that will help to deliver zero carbon building, certainly in operation, whether that's from passive house all the way through to temperature floor modeling, various different things. I think perhaps, and it goes back to your point at the start, Jed, is it's making sure that those interdisciplinary principles, the bits where the design professions meet, work. So for example, the best way to achieve 100% MMC in building services is to make sure that volumetrically and geometrically the building can accommodate it. So I think there's a really big point is, again, just about that interdisciplinary one team approach, and making sure that everything we're doing is joined up. And the only other point I was going to make, and perhaps one of the goes into the skill shortage, and I think a question that's just come through about generative design as well, and building on your point, is that one of the things we just need to keep our eye on is that we've got a skill shortage for people coming into the industry, but we've also got kind of a generation retiring from the industry as well. And one of the challenges is, I think, whilst we are getting very good at design and developing our own tools, generative design tools, whatever they may be, and becoming very good with data in the digital world, there's just a slight danger that we become slightly detached from the physical world. And it's making sure that, you know, the next generation, certainly if we're going to be working more remotely as well, have access to that real world learning, going to see buildings, see how they work, and understanding systems in operation as well. So we're consultants as well as designers.
I mean, it kind of relates to a question just made by Andy Bailey about exactly that subject, you know, but I guess the question is, you know, are architects and engineers could they become product designers, and, you know, look at designing kind of systems that are assembled and disassembled? I don't know whether Helen or Rob or Randy would have anything to say about that. Helen,
Yeah.
do you want to go?
Yeah, I mean, I agree that it takes a different mindset to design a building that, well, or does it? It definitely takes a different mindset to build a building made out of specific component parts, that if the part doesn't fit, don't cut it to fit because it's the wrong part. Yeah. So
or design the system out of the material size that you get delivered to site, which you come back to.
So make sure the sequencing of delivery is right.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the question on, sorry, just repeat the question, Jen.
It was about sort of, you know, could we potentially be starting to become product designers rather than sort of architects and engineers?
Yeah, but almost certainly, but you know,
and I'm not saying that's a bad thing.
Yeah, but as creatives, as a, you know, as professionals, we are product designers anyway, aren't we?
Yeah.
It's just a different type of product, and it, you know, we should be able to adapt to that, in my view. So yeah.
Quick thing, I was just going to add to that. I think on the product design front, I think perhaps the elephant in the room as well can often be procurement, because in a systems-based design and a product-based design approach, you know, we need more certainty on procurement earlier, and I think that's something that kind of we need to really address as well as an industry and with clients. Maybe it goes back to the point about clients getting better advice early doors, and really kind of lock those sorts of things down.
Yeah, and I would just add, Helen already alluded to this, which was great, the provocation that become product designers. I thought that's what we were.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you know, building on what you're saying, Jed, is this idea that fourfold, now we'll go to the number 4, that designers will be product designers, but they'll also be systems designers, as you said. There'll be strategy designers, and really importantly, I think, user interface designers. UX is going to enter our field in terms of the user experience, both in terms of, as we talked about at the beginning of this session, in terms of the implementation or construction from design to construction, try to design the user interface, you know, to try to bridge the two sides of design and construction better, but as importantly, from construction to how people will use buildings. I think those 4 areas are all going to be incredibly, critically important moving forward.
Okay.
I think that the point on the product designer architect is an interesting one. I've had two multidisciplinary construction consultants, well, 2 multidisciplinary construction consultancies, and 2 or 3 small business startups that are coming into the built environment, asking, well, basically saying we need product designer architects. So as Randy said, people that understand systems, so systems engineering and systems people, so designers that understand that, and also have training as product designers. So there's a lot of this kind of, we want people to sit in that liminal space between professions or disciplines. And I think, you know, both in education and in industry, we need to get our heads around that and not have this kind of ossified version of what a particular profession is, because there's stuff that sits between both 2, 3 areas.
Agreed, and I think that's, you know, I think we've come to the end of our time. The hour's gone really quickly. That's actually a really good point to finish, because I think, you know, I think the conclusion for me has been that collaboration between architects, engineer, all kinds of engineers, all the design team has to be closer and more sort of coordinated and more efficient. But I can see that happening kind of already. And I think that will grow as we kind of face the challenges that we face in the environment, you know, to you know, deliver these kind of carbon sort of neutral sort of projects that we've all got the ambition to deliver, which is really important for the planet, as we have all recognised. I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank the panel. Helen, Randy, Steve, Rob, all made brilliant contributions. I've really enjoyed sort of chairing it. I'd just like to thank all the sort of audience for logging on and for enjoying the debate. It's all recorded, so it will go onto the FBE sort of YouTube channel. And I'd just like to say thanks for your contribution, especially thanks to Randy for getting up at 5:30 in the morning to be part of the panel. And hopefully pretty soon we'll all catch up and be able to do this in a live environment. We're actually talking about organising an FBE social very soon, and there'll be new news that will come out on that. And it'd be great to kind of, you know, give you a hug and shake your hand before too long. But thanks again, and hopefully I'll catch you all very soon. Cheers. Have a good day.